A lot of people didn't know this, but GTA 5 has been released at least 4 times. It first launched for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 back in 2013. It was re-released in 2014 with several improvements and additions for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. The PC version came out in 2015 with a few more tweaks, though nothing major. Finally, in 2022, the latest version of GTA 5, known as GTA 5 Expanded and Enhanced, was released, at least for now. About 3 weeks ago, or 20 days to be exact, I uploaded a video showcasing all the differences between GTA 5 on PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 4 version. It highlighted some major changes that many people probably hadn't noticed. The idea for this video is to follow up on that one, like a part 2, all the differences between GTA 5 on PlayStation 4 and the latest version released in 2018-2022, which is the Expanded and Enhanced Edition, the standard for PlayStation 5. That said, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe before we get started. Let's go. It's important to clarify right at the beginning of this video that this comparison is nothing like the PlayStation 3 versus PlayStation 4 version. The PlayStation 4 versus PlayStation 5 comparison is much more about graphical improvements and details rather than added missions or new features. Even so, I'll try to cover as much as possible, but there might be 1 or 2 things I miss along the way. The first thing you'll notice is that the loading screen has changed quite a bit. In the PlayStation 4 version, the wallpaper appeared in the background in a cropped format, while the character was displayed in front. Both the character and the wallpaper would subtly move on the screen, creating a cool effect. The way the screens transitioned was also different. It had a swipe to the side animation on the PlayStation 4. In the PlayStation 5 version, there's no more cropping on the wallpaper. It now fills the entire screen, giving it a much more serious, or at the very least minimalist vibe. To me, it seems like Rockstar has been making the game simpler and more straightforward since the PlayStation 3 days. I'm not sure if everyone feels the same way, but that's definitely the impression I got just by looking at the loading screen. Another noticeable difference happens before we even get to the loading screen. On the PlayStation 4, the game would take you straight into the game. For example, when you launched GTA 5, it would immediately start loading story mode, and you could press square, for instance, if you wanted to jump directly into a GTA Online session instead of story mode. But there was no menu where you could choose what to do. You had to make that decision during the loading time. In the Expanded and Enhanced version, when you launch the game, you're greeted with a menu where you can choose whether to start story mode, jump into online mode, or even access something like GTA Plus. This is a big change from the previous version, where there was no pause to make a choice. This new menu ties into a feature exclusive to the PlayStation 5 version, which allows you to launch GTA Online as if it were a completely separate game from GTA 5. For those who didn't quite understand how this works, since the PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and PC versions, GTA 5 Story Mode and GTA Online have always been bundled together. Whenever you bought one, you automatically got the other. However, in the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series versions, and just to clarify, whenever I mention PlayStation 5, I'm referring to the latest generation in general, GTA Online is now a separate game. You can purchase GTA 5 Story Mode without buying online and vice versa. This is likely why the menu was introduced, something we didn't have before. Since you can now buy just online or just the story mode, it also eliminates a requirement that existed in the PlayStation 3 and 4 versions. Back then, every time you started GTA 5 from scratch without any save data, you were forced to complete at least the prologue of GTA 5 before gaining access to GTA Online. Now, with the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series versions, that's no longer necessary. You can jump straight into GTA Online without having to complete the prologue, a convenience we didn't have in the earlier version. For those who play GTA 5 story mode, this change might not make much sense, but there are plenty of people who buy GTA 5 just for GTA Online. In that case, it makes total sense not to have to replay the prologue or the Franklin and Lamar mission. And just to add to the topic of GTA Online, there's another notable difference compared to the PlayStation 4 version. In the PlayStation 5 version, when you create a new character, you can now choose from 4 career paths: CEO, Gunrunner, and so on. Each of these career options provides you with some starting properties, a bit of money, and other perks to give you a head start. This is essentially Rockstar encouraging players to dive into GTA Online, something they didn't do as explicitly in the PlayStation 4 generation and earlier. Now, stepping away from the GTA Online topic and focusing a bit more on story mode, there's a difference here that to me doesn't make much sense. Honestly, I don't quite understand why this change was made. Rockstar justified it by saying it was to support future updates, maintain community support, and so on, but it still doesn't add up in my opinion. What I'm talking about here is the Rockstar Editor. The Rockstar Editor was a feature introduced in GTA 5 starting with the PlayStation 4 version. It didn't exist on PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360. However, after the release of the expanded and enhanced version of GTA 5 for PlayStation 5 on February 20th, 2024, the Rockstar editor was removed from the PlayStation 4 versions. Honestly, I don't understand why this happened. They might claim it's due to online stability issues, just as an example, but even if that were the case, I think they could have removed the Rockstar editor only from online mode. There's no reason to remove it from story mode as well. And guys, just to be clear, you can't access the Rockstar editor in any way on the PlayStation 4 or Xbox One anymore. It's been completely removed. Meanwhile, this feature remains available on the PC version, which in my opinion is basically the same as the PlayStation 4 version. GTA 5 on PC and PlayStation 4 are nearly identical. So yeah, it really doesn't make much sense to me, but it is what it is. Now let's talk about a new addition we got in the PlayStation 5 version, different game modes. What are these game modes? First, there's performance mode in GTA 5, where the game runs at a solid 60 FPS with a 1440p resolution. You can also switch to fidelity mode, which runs in 4K at a locked 30 frames per second. This mode maximizes ray tracing for reflections, shadows, and so on, but sacrifices frame rate for visual fidelity. There's also a performance RT mode, which combines both approaches. This is the mode I believe most players choose, including myself, for regular gameplay. It allows you to experience some ray tracing effects while still maintaining 60 FPS, which for me makes a huge difference. However, even though I prefer playing at 60 FPS, for this video's graphical comparisons, I'll be using fidelity mode, where the game runs in 4K HDR at 30 FPS. That's because the focus here is on showcasing the graphics, not the smoothness of 60 FPS gameplay. But let me tell you, 60 FPS definitely makes a bigger difference to me than some of the extra reflections in fidelity mode. One noticeable point here is the increased density and population. From the PlayStation 3 to the PlayStation 4, there was a significant improvement in the number of NPCs and street traffic, cars, pedestrians, and so on. That trend continues in GTA 5. While the jump from PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 5 isn't as significant as the leap from PlayStation 3 to PlayStation 4, you can still notice a higher density of NPCs and more intense traffic with slightly more varied behavior. On the PlayStation 4 version of GTA 5, things felt more repetitive. Some animations and other details have also been noticeably improved in this version. Now let's talk about explosions, fire, and smoke. I'm grouping these three together because they often happen simultaneously, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you now. Basically, when you blow up a car, and I'll be using the same car on both the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, you can see a very striking difference. The first thing you'll notice is the fire. On the PlayStation 5, the fire looks much more intense and vibrant, and I think the biggest difference overall is that besides being more vivid and slightly denser, the fire also has extra details like particles breaking off. You know, those little burnt fragments that crumble and float in the air. I'm not sure what the correct term for this is, but these particles make everything feel more realistic. It's not a game-changing difference, but it does add a bit more realism. Along with the fire, there's also a noticeable improvement in the smoke. The smoke is much denser and more visible. In the PlayStation 4 version of GTA 5, the smoke looked much fainter and weaker, you could say. Some people have even said Rockstar overdid it with the smoke in this version, making it look almost cartoonish. Personally, I prefer this newer version, but I think it really comes down to personal taste. This difference in fire and smoke isn't just noticeable when you blow up a car. Even if you pour gasoline on the ground, shoot the trail of fire, or similar actions, you'll see these differences clearly. Explosions also feel like they have a bigger impact now, more intense and with a stronger response. The explosions appear larger and denser, but I believe this is mainly due to the improved fire and smoke effect. These enhancements make everything feel more dynamic and immersive. Moving on to the next topic, but still focusing on smoke, there's also a noticeable difference in tire smoke from vehicles. Actually, it's not a difference in the smoke itself, it's the same smoke we see in explosions. What I want to point out here is just another situation where the improved smoke effects are noticeable. When you're doing burnouts with your car, on the PlayStation 4 generation, the smoke that comes off the tires was pretty thin and weak. On the new generation, the smoke is much thicker and more intense, just like the smoke we see when something is set on fire. One difference, which I believe is due to ray tracing, is that now we have shadows in the smoke. It might sound like a small or silly detail, but for those who pay attention to the finer details, it makes a big difference. Even if you're not someone who notices these things, once you've seen it, playing on the PlayStation 4 might feel a bit underwhelming knowing those details are missing. Now moving on to a more subtle difference, we have the draw distance. Draw distance refers to the level of detail visible as you look further into the game world. There's a slight improvement when comparing the PlayStation 4 to the PlayStation 5, especially in the vegetation. For example, if I stop here at the top of the Vinewood sign, where we get a wide view of the mountains, vegetation, and the city below, you can notice that the detailing changes very little. But on the PlayStation 5, it's slightly better, with more detail visible at a distance. When you look far away, you'll also notice that ray tracing now now adds shadows to distant objects, like trees that previously didn't have any shadows. This adds a bit more realism to the game, but I feel like the improvement is minimal. It could have been pushed a little further. Now moving on to a detail that very few people have noticed, but I think makes a really cool difference. Shadows when you're driving a vehicle. For those who haven't realized, and I believe 99% of people might not have noticed, when you're playing GTA 5 on your PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, or even on PC depending on your settings, the light emitted by your car's headlights doesn't cast shadows on other cars, objects, trees, or anything else. That feature simply didn't exist. However, in the PlayStation 5 version of GTA 5, when you're driving through the city at night, you can now see that your vehicle's headlights cast shadows on surrounding objects. It's really interesting to notice this because when you compare the two versions side by side, the difference is almost shocking. I believe a lot of people hadn't picked up on this, but now they'll start noticing it all the time because it's something that adds a lot more realism and, I don't know, maybe even a bit more immersion to the next-gen version of GTA 5. It was one of those details that at first seemed like it wouldn't make any difference, but now that it's there, it feels like it really does. Going back to vegetation, you can also notice that in the latest generation, the density of vegetation has increased. There's more grass, shrubs, and general greenery visible throughout the game. They also slightly redesigned these elements, and they're much more detailed now. This improvement wasn't applied everywhere, but I think the majority of GTA 5's locations saw an increase in vegetation density. However, even 3 generations after the game's initial release, the number of trees shown in the beta version, which you can still see in GTA 5's first trailer, hasn't been added. In this case, I'm not sure if Rockstar decided against it because it wouldn't make sense now, or maybe it would have been too much work or caused performance issues, even on the PlayStation 5 generation. Depending on how things go, we might end up seeing another re-release of GTA 5 for the PlayStation 6, and in that version, maybe they'll finally include all the details that were present in the beta version. Another detail I really enjoyed, and I have to say this one is pretty cool because it ties into the missions, is the glass in the game. You end up interacting with it quite a bit during gameplay. In GTA 5 on the PlayStation 4, when you shot at car windows, the glass would break, and you'd see pieces fall to the ground. You could even drive over the broken glass and hear the sound it made. But now, in the PlayStation 5 version, there's an additional animation. When you shoot at the windows, you can see pieces of glass falling outside the vehicle, inside the vehicle, or even around it. On the PlayStation 4, these glass shards didn't fall like this. They just shattered without scattering around the area. Now, with this added detail, the glass feels much more dynamic and realistic, which is a really nice touch. Now, let's dive into a controversial topic, ray tracing. Ray tracing was added to GTA 5 on the PlayStation 5, but at first it sparked a lot of criticism. Let me explain why so many players complained about the ray tracing on the PS5. In its initial version, ray tracing on the PS5 was very limited. It wasn't used for reflections, it was mainly applied to shadows. This meant that all the game's shadows were generated using ray tracing, which added more depth and realism in certain areas. For example, it allowed for shadows from car headlights, trees, and other objects to appear more naturally. However, after significant feedback from the community, Rockstar introduced ray tracing for reflections in December 2022 with the Drug Wars DLC. That said, it doesn't work on 100% of reflections. It seems like Rockstar created a hybrid system, combining the older method from the PlayStation 4 with the new ray tracing for the next-gen versions. For instance, in some storefronts and specific areas, you can clearly see ray tracing-enabled reflections, but on larger buildings, it doesn't quite match what was seen on the PlayStation 4 version. I'd guess that applying ray tracing to every single reflection would have been too demanding, considering GTA 5 is an open-world game with a lot of reflective surfaces. Fully implementing ray tracing everywhere might have made the game extremely resource-intensive and hard to run smoothly. From what I've understood, this ray tracing for reflections works best in fidelity mode. If you switch to performance mode or performance RT, ray tracing, you'll mostly only have ray tracing applied to shadows and very few reflections. In addition to that, there were some other subtle details added to make the game feel a bit more alive. For example, interaction with elements. If you shoot at grass in the PlayStation 5 version, you'll now see a lot more grass particles flying around compared to the PlayStation 4 version, and each of these grass particles will cast its own shadow thanks to ray tracing. This same improvement applies to other elements like wood. On the PlayStation 4, more wood splinters and shards flying off, and again, each one has its own shadow. These small details add a lot of depth and realism to the game. Interaction with vegetation also saw some changes. For example, if you go to a sidewalk where there are dead leaves scattered around, those leaves now react differently when interacting with walls. Here's an example: if you drive a vehicle and start doing burnouts near a wall, pushing those dead leaves backward. In the PlayStation 4 version, the leaves would simply pass straight through the wall. In the PlayStation 5 version, however, some of the leaves will still clip through the wall, but others will stick to it. This shows that in some ways there's now a better interaction between elements in the game. Collisions, boundaries, and overall physics are more refined on the PlayStation 5 compared to the PlayStation 4 version. When it comes to the water in the game, there's practically no difference. For example, if you decide to shoot at the water in the PlayStation 4 version and then do the same in the PlayStation 5 version, the change is almost negligible. In the PlayStation 5 version, you can see a slightly bigger splash of water, but the animation itself is exactly the same, so for me it feels like nothing really changed. Another addition was the motion blur setting. However, I noticed that a lot of people complained about it, with many players even turning it off because they felt it was poorly implemented in GTA 5. Personally, I don't know about you, but I use it and actually like it. Now moving on to one of the most interesting features I've experienced in GTA 5, something exclusive to the PlayStation 5 version, and that's the haptic feedback of the controllers. With the expanded and enhanced version of GTA 5, you can now feel a bit of texture and resistance while playing. For example, you can sense the difference when driving on grass, on the beach, in the rain, or even while using a weapon. This is only possible on the PlayStation 5 thanks to the DualSense technology, and honestly, in my opinion, the DualSense is one of the standout features of this latest console generation. The rest, graphics, games, and so on, has been somewhat underwhelming, but the DualSense has added a new level of immersion. Once you get used to it, it's hard not to miss it when going back to the PlayStation 4 version. Another improvement added to the PlayStation 5 version compared to the PlayStation 4 is support for Tempest 3D audio, which delivers a more immersive sound experience, making it feel like you're actually inside the game. However, to fully enjoy it, you need headphones or speakers that support this feature. On the PlayStation 4, the standard options were stereo or 5.1 surround sound, which I think is the default for most games. While this improvement doesn't even come close to the massive leap we saw from PlayStation 3 to PlayStation 4, you can still notice a significant difference between the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 version. That said, I'm not claiming this justifies the price or anything like that. It really depends on each person's preferences, what they like, what they don't, and what they feel is worth the investment. And guys, just like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, besides the differences I showed here, there are other amazing differences between the PS3 and PS4 versions. By clicking right here on the video indicated by the arrow, you can check it out, and it's absolutely awesome. And that's it for today, folks. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Take care, and bye.